Welcome into the Own Yourself Show. My name is Alex Ardell. You can go follow me over on Twitter at Voting is Violence. There's no O in violence. This is the fourth video in my culture series. The first one was the purpose of the left, and then the purpose of the right, the appeal of the left, and the appeal of the right. And here's when we can start getting into why the right is so bad at affecting culture. And we're going to start from this fundamental misunderstanding that the right has, that tradition and culture are equivalent. They're not. Culture can become tradition, but all culture starts as an assault on tradition. So culture is created as an assault on the old tradition, then it's adopted, then it becomes tradition, and all new culture must assault that tradition. Now, since the right believes that culture is something that just springs up naturally and results out of the natural order, they're in no place to create new culture because they are always defending old tradition. That just puts the left at a strategic advantage right off the bat, where their goal is to assault the natural order or assault the tradition. And that's a huge problem. That's just a fundamental problem, and it's why you see right-wingers defend things like Social Security or battles that they've lost. The new culture that's created becomes tradition, and now they're defending it. It's not good. It's not a good place to try to affect culture if you don't fundamentally understand that all culture is an assault on tradition. So think about Christianity. If you ask a right winger to describe their culture to you, a lot of them will describe it as a Christian culture. Well, when Christian culture was created, it was an assault on the old pagan traditions and Judaism. And over time it was adopted, and then it became tradition. And that's why you can use the words Christian culture or the Christian tradition interchangeably. So let's see. So the problem here is pretty apparent. If you exist to defend tradition, you will always fight culture, and you will always lose because you don't have the tools to fight a new culture springing up. So this is kind of a conundrum where it's almost like the right can never really create culture unless the left were to get so ingrained in the tradition, and we got a tradition of leftism, and then maybe the right could offer a return to the old tradition, which I don't think is too ridiculous of an idea. We're getting to the point where we could definitely have leftism so ingrained in society that a return to tradition would be appealing. But the problem is that the right-wing culture must exist to, or must serve to uphold the natural order, and that's going to put the right at a distinct advantage because the left's new culture, it simply serves to create equality, and that's an open-ended, impossible goal that can be used to justify any number of new cultural creations. That's why you see rambling SJW ramblings. They just create nonsensical justifications for their crazy cultural critiques, because it's such an open-ended goal to just create equality. You can basically use anything to create equality. The right has a much harder task in demonstrating the appeal of tradition because you're held to the binds of tradition. You have history on your side to simply look at, and that's about as far as you can go with it. You can't promise things from the tradition that have not happened. Um, the leftists can promise whatever they want because their goal is open-ended and not possible, and it's completely theoretical. The right-wing defense of tradition is a defense of the results of that tradition. And so they kind of have to stick to some amount of factual, um, some factual basis. Now they can just completely misrepresent what the past was, and I think they do that a lot. Um, like this idea that 1950s America was this great place you would want to live. I think is kind of ridiculous. I wouldn't want to live in 1950s America, but if you can present tradition like that, that's really their only chance. And so um, that's a very specific goal, like a return to the natural order, a return to tradition. And that's their only hope is to offer a return to the old culture or the old tradition that has been overrun. And that is basically not much different than the creation of new culture, like traditionalism. They can offer things like that as a return to the old, to the past. Now, say your neighborhood is under assault by someone, by hostile forces. What's the first thing you have to do? And this is what's going on. The tradition is under assault. All new cultural creation is an assault on culture. All new leftist culture, or an assault on tradition. All new leftist culture is an assault on tradition. So say your neighborhood is being assaulted. What do you have to do to make sure that it doesn't get overrun? Um, you need to find like-minded people, your neighbors, and then you band together to protect your turf. You need a group to come together and protect. You'll die alone. You're not going to lone wolf protect your neighborhood. You're not going to lone wolf protect your culture or your tradition. So the key here is tribalism, and that's become a dirty word from people in the center right arena who don't exist to actually get anything done or win any wars. They exist to basically pacify the right into succumbing to the leftist assault. That's why you see everyone in this alternative media center right arena was at one point a leftist. So they either don't fundamentally understand what's going on here, or they actually want the left to win. This is Dave Rubin. This is Jordan Peterson. This is Joe Rogan. Anyone in Jordan or Dave Rubin's IDW thing. All of these people exist to push the right into the center right and abandon tribalism. And they all came from the left. As such, they don't understand how integral tribalism is to defending tradition. You can't defend tradition without tribalism, because tradition is culture that has been adopted by a large group and practiced by them. And you need that group of like-minded people to defend what is under assault. And you can't do that without tribalism. You can't do that without identifying who the like-minded people are. That's the point of tribalism. That's the key to the right having any chance at defending tradition. This is why I rail against those guys: Jordan Peterson, Dave Rubin, etc., etc. They don't understand this. They just see collectivism and tribalism as the same thing, and it's all bad. Well, that's not true. I explained it last week. Um, if I'm wearing a Raiders hat and you're wearing a Raiders hat, and I meet you in some foreign country, uh, and we both cry about how much the Raiders suck, and somewhere in there, I'm going to have some connection to you. And nowhere in that connection does it say I owe you anything. Nowhere does it say any sort of collectivism. Nowhere does it say you owe me something for free. Um, all it means is we have some sort of connection. I might trust you more than I might trust someone around us because we're like-minded people. That's all it means. That's all tribalism means is this other person, you can identify with another person based on any number of characteristics. It's not bad in itself. In fact, it's the only key to defending tradition, because if you tried to defend your neighborhood from assault by yourself or just as a bunch of individual cells, you and your neighbors didn't communicate and just tried to defend the neighborhood would be overtaken. You need to be able to communicate with people who you understand both want to defend the neighborhood. That's tribalism. So obviously, tribalism has to be used discriminatingly to delineate useful boundaries. So what a lot of people see is racial tribalism. I don't see that as a good idea for the right. Leftists are prevalent in all racial groups. If we just said all white people band together, dude, like half of white people are leftists. What are you thinking? That's not going to give you like good, useful characteristics to know that you have a like-minded person. It's not useful to defending tradition by just saying based on skin color. And then you have all sorts of other people of different skin colors who could help you defend the tradition. So I don't see that as being very useful. The right would be better off appealing to a tribalism that would unite them or would unite their own. Giving them the numbers and the unity to defend the larger culture. So some characteristics and ideas that could be used. I think Christianity is a good one. I think the idea of property ownership. This is a tradition in the West that's been very beneficial. And you can, if me and you are both on board with property ownership and the right to property or to own property, we can disagree on a lot of stuff. That's a useful characteristic to know that we belong to that tribe of capitalists. It's a useful thing. Individualism is another. Western tradition, a larger Western tradition than that, which is mostly individualism, but it's also it's more than that. It's a respect for society around you that you don't see out of a lot of other cultures. And then ethnic tradition. And that's different than simply racial tradition. A Swedish person, a Swedish person and a German don't have the same cultural tradition. So to call them both white and say racial tradition is dumb. But Swedes will recognize themselves anywhere in the world and have a connection with another Swede based on their ethnic tradition. So that is a tribe that's useful. So there are a few things that the right could unite on. And it can't unite on rejecting tribalism, because that is, like I talked about very shortly on a podcast a couple of days ago, that's a principle that defeats itself. If you say we want to defend tradition by abandoning tribalism, you've lost. Anyway, that's my show for you on the appeal of the right. The appeal of the right is some sort of return to tradition. It can only be accomplished through tribalism. My name is Alex Ardell. Go follow me over on Twitter at Voting is Violence. There is no O in violence.